Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming, guys. I appreciate you all, whether you're watching us on YouTube or on Rumble. Today, I have with me one of my favorite guests, Dr. Tarik Cyril Amar. He is a historian and associate professor at Koç University. And one of the commentators says, Sheikh Tarik is our teacher. So you have now some of your students are following you also on this live streaming. Happy
That's
to have you
kind.
today, Tarik.
Thank you. Happy to be here again.
You're being called a sheikh. When I was a little bit younger, my father used to call me Haji. He used to call me Haji.
I was not aware of this. This is the first time I hear this.
My grandfather also they used to call him Haji, and my father started calling me Haji as well. And I had some of his father's, let's say, how I handle life and how I get frustrated very quickly. But I put it under control lately, especially when everything we watch around the world. And I think we have to keep our temper and become a little bit more diplomatic because one of the reasons why they keep provoking ordinary people like ourselves is for us to go to the edge. And when you're on the edge, especially mentally and psychologically, and they play on our nerves, probably we misbehave or we don't act in the most let's say clever way in such situations, or wise way. And this is the where I want to start the conversation with you, because this week I truly noticed something has changed in Germany in terms of how the police is treating the pro-Palestine demonstrators. I watched many videos of them brutalizing especially women, underage boys. And some of these videos are completely unprovoked. Like a woman is walking and then somebody comes from the police and pushes her very brutally from the back and she falls on her head. And another one, like I can't even show this footage now on YouTube because they will just take it down. But I'm sure, guys, if you want to watch these videos, you can go on X and just type police and Berlin, and you will see all this footage coming from there. And I'm not here to to discredit the police. In many places, the police here in Germany intervened on my side. I've been attacked multiple times, and they helped me. There were so many good officers there. But now that I see, it seems that there is an instruction to the police to abuse these protesters and these demonstrators in the streets. In my mind, when a government or a minister or anyone takes a decision, they want to reach to an outcome. And when they see this outcome is not being reached, which is suppressing these voices, it's been increased and it's counterproductive, they start to shift the policy, right? To change the policy. But in this case, I see that there is an insistence on not only continuing the same policy, but increasing the pace of the brutality against the pro-Palestine demonstrations. And this is something that you wrote in an article on your Substack titled "Shielding Israel, Germany is Still Drawing the Wrong Lessons from the Holocaust." What do you think is the end goal of this crackdown on the pro-Palestine demonstrations to begin with? And why, among many other choices, the government has picked this choice, complete crackdown on the demonstrators?
If you ask me for an end goal, I think the end goal is, we can read off the end goal from what they have been doing, what they did also to the Palestine Congress that was supposed to take place in Berlin a few months ago, that was brutally suppressed, what they have tried to do, or what they are trying to do to Ali Abu Nima, the Palestinian journalist and activist from the United States, who is basically subjected to the most sort of crude and moronic sort of lawfare that you can imagine by the Germans. So if we read off what they want from these actions, then it's very clear, I think. They want to perfectly and totally criminalize any solidarity with Palestine and the Palestinians. They want to pretend that if you express in public solidarity with a people that is subject to an ongoing genocide, that makes you a criminal, and even a specific type of criminal, namely a terrorist or a sympathizer of terrorism. This is what they're trying to do. And from what I see in German media and in German social media, unfortunately, they are fairly successful with this. You've probably seen the Focus, an important German journal magazine, cover recently, right? Where once again the most abject, the most primitive stereotypes and prejudices against Islam were being used, right? And where they made it appear once again that all that Islam is some sort of dark force attacking the West. And of course, they also added a Palestinian scarf to that picture. So the scaremongering, the prejudices, the stereotypes are at maximum level, up to 11, as we used to say. And the aim can only be to achieve a complete marginalization and a criminalization of any sign in public, especially in society, of solidarity with the Palestinians. Now, that this is completely morally perverse, right? We all understand this is abject. This is a horrible thing to do by the German authorities. But I think this is the pattern we are seeing now. I guess that the question gets more complicated when we ask, why are they doing this? Why are they doing this? Is this genuinely ideological conviction? Have they been so brainwashed themselves by these Zionist Hasbara narratives that they reproduce and that they're listening to? Is it because they're following the lead of the USA, which is always something you have to consider with German elites? They're incredibly obedient again towards the Americans. I grew up basically in the 70s and 80s, and the climate wasn't as bad then. There was a lot of obedience, a lot of conformism. But what we are seeing now, the way that Germany is just submitting itself to whatever America does, while America is getting actually more violent and more insane by the day, that strikes me as almost unprecedented. Another theory is, of course, that they're doing this somehow for electoral purposes, that they're trying to appeal to a certain section of the German public that is xenophobic, Islamophobic, racist, that enjoys the violence that the Israelis are inflicting on the Palestinians. And I see in German social media that there is such a section of the German public. They would love to take part in the genocide, if you ask me, from the way they talk. I don't know what the right answer is, why they're doing this, but I think it's fairly clear what they're trying to do. They're trying to completely monster, as they say in some political discourses, they're trying to monster any solidarity with the Palestinians. In my view, it's important to resist this all the time and not let it pass and not let it reshape our public space.
I am going to show you the cover of the magazine that you were referring to. This is the Focus magazine, Allah's Schläfer. And yes, one of the commentators says on the front page of this week's German magazine Focus is this reminder that everything is good in the propaganda pig and that the panoply of Islamist peril must therefore necessarily include the Palestinian headscarf. And one of my friends, when she was walking in the street, she found the copy of this magazine and she said it to me. She said, look what they're doing here. Another, by the way, cover of magazine this week was coming from The Bild. And this is showing, what was her name? The green politician, Ricarda Lang. She was in a taxi with a taxi driver who is basically wearing the keffiyeh on his head. And they say, wie gefährlich war Ricarda Lang's Taxifahrer? How dangerous was the taxi driver of Ricarda Lang? And she's a politician from the Green Party. This is how they portray things in the German press. And this guy says, anti-Palestinian racism in this country knows no boundaries. I mean,
that is
the
true.
press is,
That is true. And it's interesting to see that because on the other side, Germany sort of prides itself, right? They think of themselves, if I may generalize, and as you know, I am German, they think of themselves as basically a liberal and open society that is very tolerant, that isn't indulging in racism and prejudices. But first of all, of course, this idyllic picture is wrong. That's an idealization, a self-idealization. Of course, there's racism in Germany, quite a lot. But when it comes to Palestine, something else happens again, which is when it comes to Palestine and Palestinians, Germans don't even think they have to pretend. They're shameless. About Palestine and Palestinians, they can do anything now, right? With other groups, with other foreigners, quite a few Germans, say in the middle class, would perhaps have prejudices, but they would keep them to themselves because they have learned, they have been socialized to be quiet about this, right? That's not ideal, but at least they're making an effort. What's interesting is that with Palestine, it's like a command has been given that for Palestinians, you can let it all out. For Palestinians, or rather against Palestinians, you can say whatever you want. That is a very special position. And perversely enough, and this is not the perversion of my thought, this is the perversion of German realities now. The last group I can think of that was treated by Germans this way were the Jews in Nazi Germany, a group which was isolated, and it was made clear these guys you can say anything about, you can mistreat them in any way, they have absolutely no rights, you can formulate all your prejudices in the open, and the more brutal, the better.
It's really, I don't even want to use the word fascinating, but it always shocks me the level of prejudice, let's say, against the Palestinians. One of my friends is a Palestinian. I hope he is watching us. Usually he joins the live streamings. And he lost his job, basically, for posting on Instagram for Palestinian story in his private account, not even public. And because one of his colleagues at work, she saw the story and she reported that she feels unsafe at work alongside him. So they had to kick him out of work because a German woman feels unsafe, and this guy is the most sweetest guy you can ever meet in your life.
May I say one thing? If he's watching us, I hope he's suing. I don't think I'm not sure if he has a chance, but I know that there are lawyers in Germany that would still fight for him. There are some lawyers, and I hope he's trying to find a good lawyer. Maybe the lawyers who have defended Moayeri, we will probably talk about her recently in Berlin. There are lawyers in Germany who are trying to push back. There was a case of a footballer, interestingly enough, a soccer player, that was not totally dissimilar, of course, at a very high level of prominence and fame. And he actually won. He won against his German club, which tried to pull something similar on him, right? Rough analogy. But I think your friend should seek legal advice, and I think you should try to fight if you can at all.
I think he took the path of how to say a settlement with his boss, and so his boss would write a recommendation letter for him that he was a nice guy and he was very hardworking, this and that, but he has to leave his work in silence. Like,
but can I say something else? I know that the person who reported him, I would say denounced him, is probably not watching your show. But just in case, I would like this person, apparently a woman, you said, in this case, I don't care whether man or woman, I would like her to know that that is disgusting behavior. That is the worst of German history. This is how authoritarianism functions. In every authoritarian system, and you found this very much in Nazi Germany, the Gestapo, for instance, when you research it, right, one of its police forces, it wasn't big. It was a relatively small police force for such a big society. And you know why it functioned anyhow? Because all these other people who were not working for the police reported and denounced voluntarily. They loved it to report on their neighbors, on their colleagues at work, and so on, and so on, and so on. And people who do this, for me, they're abject. I despise them.
I am totally on your side on this, Tarik. That's why I'm very, very careful and what I say, because I don't feel free, basically, to speak my mind. And my mind is I have very reasonable thoughts, nothing out of the line, but nobody knows what's the line any longer. And I can read every day on X new examples. Yeah, new examples on X, people receiving fines and calls from the police for questionnaire about a post on X, on Twitter, on YouTube, this and that. And one of the articles, I mean, in your article, you mentioned an example of a woman who was fined by a court.
Yes.
This is
Yeah.
the article shielding Israel. On August 6th, a court in Berlin sentenced a young woman called Ava Muayeri to a fine of 600 euros for shouting, quote, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," quote, ended. One of Muayeri's lawyers, Alexander Gorski, deplored this as, a quote, "a rather dark day for freedom of expression in Germany." He's right, even if his comment is an all too understated response to a scandalous miscarriage of justice. Indeed, it is hard to answer the question of what is wrong with this sentence, because quite literally everything is. Judge Birgit Balzer's reasoning for one thing was embarrassingly shoddy, irresponsibly misinformed, and ethically and legally misguided, about which more below. Beyond Balzer's failure to do justice to the important issue, she had to adjudicate. Sometimes your terminologies are cooked, we say in Arabic, very professional. The case and sentence also represent a larger problem in Germany and beyond. The West's perverse pampering of Israel. One form taken by this pampering is to allow the Israeli regime to abuse the memory of the Holocaust, a genocide targeting Jews, to claim impunity for its own crimes against humanity, including genocide targeting Palestinians. I mean, the problem with this current legalization or criminalization, let's say, of some of the sentences, it's just limiting speech and misinterpreting also what "from the river to the sea" means.
Of
And
course.
if it is criminal, if we have to criminalize "from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," this is the quote that many Palestinians use, then we should also criminalize what the Likud party says, "from the river
Yes.
to the sea, the Israeli sovereignty will be imposed on this entire region,"
Of
right? Like,
course.
it's just one-sided in this case.
Yes, absolutely. Look, to start with your last point, in this article, I didn't really have time to discuss this a lot. I did it in an earlier piece, which was about Rashida Tlaib, and when she was censured by in the American Congress, right, in the House of Representatives, over also this particular phrase, this sentence, this slogan. It's very clear that when you look, you know this yourself, at the history of this slogan. Most of the time, it is used in a way, in a manner that is about liberation. Yes, absolutely, but it has nothing to do with ethnic cleansing or genocide or intention to commit genocide. That is what the Israelis are claiming, to criminalize, to smear the slogan and to smear the Palestinians, and once again to smear solidarity with the Palestinians globally. But it is a lie. Once again, a big fat Israeli lie, for which a lot of people in the West have fallen, or which they also like to tell. In reality, if you try to look at the center of the slogan, its core meaning over time, it goes back several decades at least. Some people trace it back even to the immediate post-war years. Some people trace it back to the 60s, just to give our audience a sense. There's a long history. So, and if you really look at the core of the sentence, of the slogan, it simply means Palestine and Palestinians have a right to be free in their own state and on their own land, which is the most normal thing you can say. It has no meaning beyond that. It doesn't imply that something horrific has to be done to somebody else, in this case, for instance, Jewish Israelis. So to do what Balzer has done, the German judge, is historically completely uninformed. It's like she's never looked up anything, right? She could converse with some experts because she has pretended that the slogan's meaning is always enormously violent. This is just wrong. It is just simply not true. So she has based her sentence against this young woman who was fined the 600 euro on an untruth, on a lie, on a propaganda lie that originates from the Israelis. And that is part of the narratives that they use to shield their crimes against humanity, of which apartheid is one part, and of which genocide is another part, and of which ethnic cleansing is a third part. And then they add all war crimes that you can think of as well to that. This narrative that the slogan itself, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," it also exists in Arabic in variations, as you know, that the slogan itself is somehow ultra-violent, is part of the propaganda of a genocidal state and movement. And a German judge picks this up, interprets it exactly in the way that this genocidal state and movement wants it to be interpreted, and then sentences somebody on the basis of that. That is the first entirely ludicrous point about the sentence.
I totally agree with you. This is going a little bit. I mean, if I were in her place and I receive a 600 euro a fine for saying from the river to the sea, I would ask them to make me pay it Ratenzahl, monatlich. So
That they
50 euro per month.
No, that's what they're actually doing. I can't tell you exactly what the schedule is, but it is some sort of payment schedule. But fortunately, to be serious, fortunately, she is, as far as I know, trying to appeal, right? And her legal team will appeal as well. When you look at what German courts have recently been doing, right? When they have been looking at this issue, Balsa is not the only case. Berlin is not the only case. A very important sentence in Mannheim, very important finding in Bavaria, another one somewhere in the north, I've forgotten. If you look at the pattern, one thing you see there is no pattern, which means that there are some German judges that actually make better decisions than this woman in Berlin. There actually are. And my hope is that if Moayeri and her legal team go into appeal procedures against this incredible miscarriage of justice, that they will find in the end such judges. And I think this would be very healthy for German public discourse as well, if this miscarriage of justice has to be revised. But the scandal is, of course, I don't want to be over optimistic that something like that can be happening in the first place, especially against the background of the ongoing genocide that Israel is committing against the Palestinians. And as you very well know, we are not just saying that, right? We have our facts. We are both observers of this situation, like many others. We are fairly thorough, I think, about this. But we are not just saying that even in that sentence. In that sense, we know that the International Court of Justice, the highest court of the United Nations, has already decided in February of this year that genocide is a probable thing happening here, committed by Israel against Palestinians. And to this, one has to add that at this stage of procedure, this is the most anti-Israel outcome that you could expect, because a full sentence takes much longer. It always takes years in such cases. And it means that we are probably looking ahead into the future and seeing how Israel has never changed its behavior. In a few years, the International Court of Justice will probably officially say Israel has committed genocide. And it has already put us all on notice that this could be coming back in February. And a German judge, against this background, sentences somebody for showing peaceful solidarity with the victims of that genocide.
Yeah.
Again, what do you do with that?
Oh, Tarik. Today, I'm sure you followed Antony Blinken is in Israel. And just to summarize to the audience what he said he's working on to return the hostages home and a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. He wants to put everyone on a better path, which is enduring peace, without mentioning, of course, the state of Israel or the status of Jerusalem or the Golan Heights, which in every case they say those are Israeli. He only 3 days ago, they permitted to send $20 billion worth of weapons to Israel again. And he said that he is there to stop the provocations, no more provocations. I mean, provocations came from the Israeli side, right? The assassinations. And so that, because he says this probably is the last chance before escalation, we are on a crossroad. And the ceasefire talks, I don't think they will reach to a credible outcome. Israelis will not accept for the Palestinians to rule themselves in Gaza or in the West Bank. They will impose their sovereignty as they promised. And I don't think that this is going to lead into any solution that could spare a conflict. Are you also pessimistic like myself that probably a clash is imminent in the region unless Iran swallows their pride and back off a little bit in this case, and they probably pursue a different path, and that is the nuclear approach to develop a nuclear weapon?
Yeah, I mean, there are two, to me, there are two big questions here. One is, as you have said, what is Iranian policy, right? I think you are absolutely right, if I understand you correctly, that Iran is in a real dilemma now. And the dilemma is there are very good reasons for striking at Israel now, and much harder than they have before. But the problem is that they might be walking into an Israeli trap. And the trap is very simple, namely, they have provoked Iran so much that Iran has to attack them again. And then they can bring in their American friends and strike at Iran together with the Americans and all their vassals. That's, of course, the Brits at least, and probably the French as well, and the Dutch, and maybe the Germans will even join, and so on, right? Bring in the West, bring in the Americans. The Iranians, of course, see this extremely well. They know all of this, right? They have said they will strike back. My guess is they're looking for a way to strike at Israel that will avoid this Western response, that will leave Israel and the West in a position where they have to absorb the strike and cannot start a big regional war. And that's a very difficult thing for them to do. Maybe it's an unsolvable task. That's my guess. In the future, look, I know many people find this scandalous. I don't understand why. My great hope is that Iran will develop nuclear weapons, because we have been shown now that there's no other way of saving the Palestinians than a regional power that is capable of deterring and containing the Israelis, and perhaps even deterring the United States. So to be very precise, I hope that Iran, which is a sovereign state and has every international right to do this under international law, will develop nuclear weapons and will develop intercontinental missiles so that they can, like North Korea, even threaten the United States. Because the way to a liberation of Palestine from this incredible injustice and from this genocidal monster that is Zionism and Israel, the way to that lies through pushing the Americans out of the Middle East. The Americans are the ones that enable the Israeli monster to behave the way it behaves. Think about it. If Israel didn't have American backing, Israel could not commit its crimes. It would have to adapt to its environment, its regional environment, and part of that adaptation would be to treat the Palestinians at least much, much better, at the very least not commit a genocide. The reason, literally, why Israel can do what it can do is that it has a blank check from the USA, which is why I and many other people have stopped saying that America is complicit in the genocide. We are saying America is co-perpetrating this genocide. It is one of the perpetrators of the genocide against the Palestinians, as is the UK, as you could argue is Canada, as you could argue to an extent is France, and of course Germany, which is, after the United States, the second biggest arms deliverer, arms supplier to Israel, right? So we're looking at a very bleak situation. If you ask yourself, what is your hope as a Palestinian? Then your hope has nothing to do with the West. It has to come from somewhere else. Now back to Blinken, right? I wonder why he's saying this is the last chance, right? One interpretation to me is that he may himself be afraid. Some other people have speculated about this as well. He may actually feel that a major war might escape even the control of the United States, and that Israel this time might really take very severe hits. And what Blinken might be doing, and again, I'm speculating, he might be trying to save the Zionist, fascist, genocidal regime from its own irrationality by explaining to them, you really have to tone it down a tiny little bit now. You have got 10 months of genocide. We helped you every which way committing it. But right now, if you don't come to a conclusion, maybe a war will erupt that we are not even in a position to completely shield you from the consequences anymore, right? So in that sense, when he talks about provocations, not because he's a good guy, Blinken is a monster. He will go down in history in infamy as a genocidal monster. But because he is so pro-Israeli, when he talks about provocations, he might actually talk about the Israelis and trying to say to them, you guys have to stop provoking, because ultimately the war that you're provoking might be so big that we, the United States, cannot guarantee that you'll be fine anymore, right? This is one interpretation of this. Back to your initial question, am I pessimistic, optimistic? I'm very pessimistic. We are already, genocide has already happened and it's still ongoing. The world is in a horrible state. It's not only that, not only in quotation marks, that a genocide has occurred, it's that the whole West has joined the genociders. I have never seen the whole planet in such a catastrophic situation as now. Never. This is horrible. This is a nightmare. So I'm very pessimistic. Am I pessimistic in the sense of the Palestinians will just be wiped out, Israel and the US will get everything they want? No, actually, I'm not. Because I do think that in all the horror that we, and above all the Palestinians, have to live through, I still think that Israel will not get away with this in the end. I don't know the path to that, but I actually think I will live in a world in which Israel has finally gotten what it deserves for what it has done. I will still see that. I will still live to see that.
Tarik, please let me know if you agree with my analysis. I would like to share with you this. I see that Netanyahu, and especially the ruling elite, let's say, I don't know if we have to call them elite in Israel, they can see the shift in the balance of power on the international level, and they see that the United States is in decay. I mean, 100 years ago, it was the Brits and which established the state of Israel, and it was the protector of the state of Israel. And then the United States replaced the UK as the protector of the state of Israel. However, nowadays, with the shift in the balance of power, there are clear indications that the US empire is in decay, and it cannot increase its power any longer. There is overexpansion, and its rivals are challenging the United States in different parts of the world. And now that they want to foresee themselves in a decade 2-3, they come to the realization that without the United States, they cannot survive in the region. Therefore, they have to reshuffle and strike Iran now, because in 2 decades and 3 decades, they're not able to confront Iran any longer. So this is the time now for war for them to reshape the balance of power with the hope of bringing the United States again in the region. And that's why I say I'm pessimistic, because this is the way, if I was in Netanyahu's brain and I have his sick brain, this is how I would think about it, right? This is how he thinks about it. He wants this war. That's why I don't see that there is going to be a solution, a ceasefire, a two-state. No. Things are not going to happen. Probably there has to be a confrontation so that everyone knows where is the balance of power. Everybody knows what strengths they have and what weaknesses they have, and accordingly, the world could reshuffle and move to multipolar world. But without a confrontation, and I hope there is no confrontation, but without a confrontation, I think the Israelis will always think that they still have the upper hand in the region. Right?
I think you're right about Netanyahu. This idea that he thinks this time is not on their side anymore. I think you're right about this. And I think there are others who think that. I think they might be split. And once again, to me, they're all monsters. So don't get me wrong. I don't make excuses for the others. I think there might be people inside the Israeli security and military sphere who think this is a crazy gamble, right? And who don't want this to happen. But I think you're right that Netanyahu sees the world like this. And that they think that better now than later, better big war now than later, and they're trying to initiate that war with their provocations. Now, I also agree with you that one big problem here is that's what I'm hearing from you, is that the United States have themselves set up in such a way that the decision ultimately is always left to Israel. This is how this mechanism works. The United States actually is the power that could decide everything because they have all the military hardware. They have the biggest influence by far. They have enormous leverage over Israel. They could decide everything. But the position they take instead, perversely, is to say, well, we have to convince the Israelis. We have to persuade the Israelis. And when the Israelis say no, then the United States goes, oh, okay, fine, then we go to war with you. This is the worst blank check again, right? Another blank check. So essentially, Blinken leaves it probably to the Israeli and probably the worst part of the Israeli leadership, and they're all horrible, to decide if we have to go through a big regional war right now or not. That might be happening. That, I think, is the upshot to me of what you have been saying. Once again, we don't obviously see the whole picture. The problem with a regional war, we all know this, is it will devastate the Palestinians more. It will devastate Lebanon. It will devastate Syria. Who knows what else it will do? Those crazies in Tel Aviv might even use a tactical nuclear weapon. They're capable of that. They're mass murderers. So its consequences would be horrific. We know, I think, that much. But it could also be that Israel is defeated in the end after a horrific war. And in the long run, I have to say, that's the only way forward. Israel must be defeated. In my view, I've said this many times, I've said this for months now. Israel must be defeated totally, like Nazi Germany, complete capitulation until they have to completely give up, no more conditions. Then it has to be regime changed, and the Israeli state has to be abolished and be replaced by liberated Palestine. And to be very clear about this, for the Nancy Fasers among us, right, for the idiots who can't distinguish things, I am not saying that anybody should commit mass murder of Jews. I'm not saying that. Repeat, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is Palestine should finally replace Israel. And then in this new Palestine, those who have committed crimes for Israel should face justice in Palestinian courts, fair but strict justice. And those who have not committed crimes and are Jewish and former Israelis should be told, if you are ready to live under a non-apartheid state where you're a citizen like everybody else, if you're accepting new normal rules, if you accept not to be treated as better than others, you can stay. If you don't like that, well, there's the door. That is not a recipe for ethnic cleansing. That is a recipe for fairness, and that is the minimum that the Palestinians need and have a right to expect. The defeat of Israel, I think, to me, I know many people think this is utopian, but to me, the military crushing defeat of Israel is the way forward. However, are we at this state? Probably not. Probably not yet. It would probably be better that such a war did occur later. In this sense, yes, time is not on Israel's side. I agree. Luckily, it's not.
One of our commentators say Prof. Tarik is reasonable, and I would like to tell you guys that the X account of Tarik is in the description below, and also, most importantly, his Substack. And this is how, when he posts his Substack, I read his article, and I would like to always invite him back on the show so that we can discuss his articles and his thoughts. So if you're on Substack, it would be brilliant to follow his work there, and also you can simply follow his X account, and when he posts the Substack articles, you can read them. Another comment I would like to make before we move to the last question of this show. Many of you say that YouTube is suppressing your comment and comments are being deleted. And sometimes I get also questioned if I am deleting. I don't delete any comments, right? I believe I'm a free speech absolutist, unlike Elon Musk. So you can say whatever you want, but if YouTube suppresses your comment, I advise you also to create an account on Rumble. I mean, I'm posting videos like this, for example, with Tarik. 10,000 people minimum watch this video on YouTube, and in 24 to 48 hours. But on Rumble, between 1,000 and 1,500 people watch it. So you have to also encourage the creators, podcasters, analysts also by creating an account on Rumble, so that when we are deplatformed, then every day you see somebody is deplatformed, demonetized, kicked out of YouTube. Also, it's your responsibility, guys, to have an account there and also encourage the creators to move their work there. Because if I only post on Rumble, then 10% of the viewership I will receive 10% of the viewership, and that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this so that it reaches as much as people possible. And rest assured that we are heading to elections in the United States, and the suppression and the monitoring will increase in the next month. So be cautious about that. Tarik, the last question is going to be a little bit far away from West Asia or the Middle East, and that is to Ukraine. And this week, we heard that the German side has issued arrest warrants against Ukrainians for allegedly being involved in sabotaging the Nord Stream pipelines. And the Welt article here says that the federal government apparently doesn't want to approve any new funds for Ukraine based on this investigation. And this guy, and his name is literally Guy Verhofstadt, president of European Movement International, I am European hashtag, 500,000 followers. He says it's critical to the security of Europe that Russia knows the West's support for Ukraine won't falter. Hugely short-sighted for German aid to Ukraine to be sacrificed to fiscal ideology at this important moment. Ukraine's freedom is equal to security for Germany and all of us. But he's coming from the place, like he's not denying that Ukraine allegedly attacked the infrastructure of Germany, and he calls it a short-sighted decision in this case. To me, it seems that Germany and other countries they wanted to find a sacrifice. They're sacrificing 3 Ukrainians because they don't want to accuse the CIA or the Pentagon of being behind the attack on the Nord Stream pipelines. But in all cases, there is also the incursion into Kursk now, and I've seen a reportage on German TV. German generals are discussing the incursion inside Kursk, and this also brings memories into the collective memory of the Russians. It's like,
we haven't seen German generals standing in front of Russian maps and giving explanations for a few decades. Actually,
it just they're giving free service to the Russians for the Russian propaganda to tell to their people, like, look, this is a World War II scenario. The Germans are again back. Like, they're making things easy for the Russians, right?
Well, look. Can I say one thing before I answer your question? Yeah. I see some problems with my internet. I think everything is fine.
It's
in the
brilliant.
worst case, if it breaks up, please just know what happened, right? Let's just go on. So I don't believe the story that has now been produced by, in effect, the German prosecutors and the Wall Street Journal together, right? Those are the 2 main sources. And the story is this attack on the 2 Nord Stream pipelines, 1 and 2. There were 4 explosions, as you probably know. 1 was far away from the other 3. All of them were very difficult to actually stage. This was a major operation at the time. Everybody admitted private people can't do this. Whoever did this must have a state behind them, right? This was very clear from the beginning. And now the story we are being told is that, the Ukrainian state was sort of involved, but not really, on the sidelines. It was sort of semi-private. A few people in Kiev got drunk one night, and they had some ideas, and then they hired a little sailing yacht, and then they did it, right? So I don't believe that story. I think it's interesting that it's being told now. I think parts of it could be real. But even if those Ukrainians and that boat were involved, which we still have to doubt, then they didn't do it alone. I guarantee you that. And the US certainly were on board in some way. And the Wall Street Journal, of course, makes a big point about saying, no, the US was not part of it, right? I think the opposite is true. The US was part of it. Maybe they again worked through the British, the MI6 or special boat services, right? Or maybe they worked through the Norwegians. They were in the mix, it seems. We heard at the beginning of the story in 2022 in September and October. Maybe, no, I'm sure they also worked through the Poles. I'm sure the Poles were involved to some extent or the other. So one thing I'm absolutely not ready to believe, which is part of this new story we are being told, which is that this was only Kiev.
Yes.
I am ready to believe that the Ukrainians had a hand in this, and maybe they were involved in a major way, but they were not alone. And this idiotic idea that we get from the Wall Street Journal, right? When you read the article, it tells you that the CIA tried to stop the Ukrainians, because we all know that the CIA never, ever does stuff like that. Crazy sabotage involving explosives, coups, violence. No, 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 no. The saintly CIA looked at this and they said, you can't do that. Please abide by the law. Come on.
Rules-based order, guys.
Yeah. So we are being told a half truth now, right? And don't forget, at the beginning, for years actually, we were told, for 1 year at least, we were told about the Russians. And everybody who had half a brain cell immediately could tell it wasn't the Russians, not because the Russians are nice. The Russians have secret services, they have special services, they can do stuff like this, they do stuff like that, but not this one. And the reason is they had zero interest in this. This was like committing suicide from a Russian perspective. I can go into the reasons, but maybe let's not even do this. The fact is, Russia was never a remotely plausible suspect. The US was, for one reason, because Biden actually announced it. Remember? He stood next to Scholz in Washington, and he was asked at a press conference, so what happens if, blah, blah, blah. And he said, yeah, we can take care of that, basically. We know how to do that if we have to. And that was it. He basically told us. And then there was Sikorski, Polish foreign minister, right? Back then in the day, who went on X or Twitter then and actually wrote, thank you, America, when the pipelines were blown up. All of this is now memory hold. We are supposed to forget that. And we are supposed to believe it was the Ukrainians all on their own. Now, why is this interesting? It's interesting, and I think you'll agree with me, and I think a lot of people see this. This is not an original insight, because it shows us that something is shifting in the attitude of the West to the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians are being thrown under the bus very, very, very clearly here. And I don't think the timing is a coincidence either. I think it has to do with the fact that the West is tired, that they don't know how to finance this anymore. You've just mentioned the German case, complicated, but they're definitely scaling back. And that I think they also know that what Ukraine has just done in Kursk, this attack we talked about, is insane. And that rather sooner than later, it will have a terrible backlash on Ukraine. Now, some people look at the Kursk attack, which has been going on, I don't know, for a week, 10 days or something, and they're like, oh my God, the Russians can't contain this. The Russians haven't yet, pushed them out again, taken them out prisoner. Look, this has happened again and again. People don't understand Putin and timing. Putin again and again beats people by having a very different sense of timing. He's like a chess player who controls the rhythm of things. Remember the Prigozhin mutiny, when Prigozhin marched on Moscow and looked very bad, and then Putin basically seemed to say, okay, fine, compromise, you go away, we're friends again. And everybody was like, yeah, Putin got defeated, Putin got humiliated. He waited 1 month, exactly 1 month, I think, and then he killed Prigozhin. Right? So the way that Putin operates in time, and I think this is very deliberate, is very different from what Westerners suspect, again and again and again. And whoever thinks that the current reaction that the Russians are showing to the Kursk incursion is the last word of the Russians, I think they're incredibly naive and very mistaken. The last word of the Russians is still coming. Yes. I would suspect that some people in Western intelligence services do understand that much, and that they know that Ukraine has badly overextended itself in Kursk, that it has wasted precious brigades, that it has wasted enormously important Western material that is getting scarce. They're having several HIMARS taken out over several days, and they don't have so many. I think the West is distancing itself from Ukraine. This is not the first time, but this is an important milestone again. Sooner or later, the West will abandon Ukraine. And I say this without any malice or sarcasm or irony. Remember, I lived in Ukraine for 5 years. I speak fluent Ukrainian. If anything, it's a little better than my Russian. I actually have lots of sympathy for Ukraine and Ukrainians, which is why I hate this war. That should never have happened. where Ukraine is being abused by the West as a proxy. And the end of the abuse as a proxy by the West, and especially the USA, always looks the same. They are dropped. They are dropped and given up once they are bled dry. And this will come for Ukraine.
Unfortunately, this is going. The Ukrainians are going to pay even higher price now after this incursion into Kursk.
Yes,
People expect from Putin to react.
yes,
He's not a
yes,
person who reacts. People need to know that this is not a PlayStation game. This is not a red alert game that we used to play when we were kids. Similarly with Iran, similarly with other places. Those are. It's totally fine to disagree with these countries, their policies, even criticize them, but you have to give them a credit that these are rational actors and they're not act upon their hormones, testosterones, like Saddam Hussein used to do previously. And those are rational actors in the region, and everybody has to be in my opinion grateful, because if these players were acting upon on their emotions, then we were already now living a World War III scenario.
yes.
So I think the
That's true.
provocations are and the stakes are too high. I hope that people understand it, how desperate is this situation and how dire is this situation. And if you find this conversation, like Sevak says, very lightning conversation, thank you, Kevork and Tarik, I would encourage you guys to follow Tarik on X and also his work on Substack. And if you're new on this channel, guys, 60% of the people watching these live streamings are not subscribers. They don't even know that they're not subscribers, because you can watch this content and then next time YouTube again recommends you some of these videos. But make sure that you're subscribed. That would be a great help and support for the independent work I'm doing here. And as I mentioned, we're here giving you knowledge, information, probably the other side of the story. You can turn on your TV, you can watch the mainstream media, and you can make up your mind. Probably the truth is in the middle. So we're just encouraging you here to have a critical thought and some provocative, let's say, conversation we're having here, mind-provoking conversation with Tarik, and he's a brilliant guest. So thank you so much, Tarik, for coming into the show.
Thank you, Kevork. Thank you. Thank you. Always a great pleasure.
It's always my pleasure. Guys, thank you so much for tuning into today's live streaming. I appreciate all of you, whether you're watching us on YouTube or on Rumble, and I encourage you to create an account on Rumble just in case we are demonetized or deplatformed from this YouTube platform. And if you like to support my independent work, you can become a patron. The link is scrolling on the screen, patreon.com/Syriana Analysis, and I will see you tomorrow, Wednesday, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Peace be upon you and upon your families. Salam.
Bye-bye.